Right, we're going to turn away from football now and to Denmark, where polls have just closed in a referendum that could reshape the country's security. Danes voted today on whether to join the European Union's common security and defence policy. It's the only one of the EU's 27 members, seen here in blue, to have opted out of the defence cooperation so far, meaning for 30 years the Danish military has played no part in most European security initiatives. Foreign policy researcher Christine Nissen explains what a yes vote would mean for Denmark.
Taking part in the EU's military operations, taking part in the EU's fairly new cooperation on permanent structured defense, and generally also participate in the decision-making processes that forms and shapes the EU security and defense policy, which the opt-out currently prohibits Denmark from having any influence on.
Well, the Danish government called the referendum in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, of course. Here's the Prime Minister.
I wholeheartedly and strongly advise a yes. I don't think I've ever advised something as much as I'm doing this time. When Putin is as aggressive as he is in Ukraine right now, as he could be elsewhere, then I think we and the rest of Europe ought to stand together.
Some analysts say a yes vote would be largely symbolic because Denmark is already a member of the NATO alliance. And there is some opposition. Here's Christine Nissen again.
There are a minority of parties supporting a no to lifting the opt-out, and all of those parties are more or less very skeptical towards EU membership.
But most Danish leaders say the security situation has changed and want closer military ties with the EU. And the latest opinion polls suggest around 49% of the public agree. Let's hear from some of them.
These kind of elections are even more important than earlier. And in times of war, it's obviously important to state if you feel that you want to join this community or not.
It has to do with the sovereignty of not only the Danish people, but also how we see and use military in the future. And that's really important to me.
Well, that debate in Denmark is part of a wider change in security policy across the Nordic region. Finland and Sweden have applied to join the NATO defence alliance, but one nation is blocking their bid. Turkey says the countries are harbouring terror groups. Here's President Erdogan today.
We explained why we are against the membership of those countries with reasons and examples, and until now we did not receive any concrete documentation that can resolve our doubts.
Well, back in Denmark, the referendum is just one part of a major policy shift since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The government agreed to a large boost in defence spending, an extra $1 billion over the next 2 years. It also announced plans to phase out Russian gas and is considering allowing US or other foreign troops to be stationed on Danish territory. Right, I think we can speak now to Adrian Murray. We can. Hello, thanks very much for coming up on Outside Source. We can see you now, just wondering whether we could or not, had a slight technical problem. Listen, bring us the latest there from Denmark.
Well, as you mentioned, the polls closed just half an hour ago, and so we're waiting for those results. They won't be out till around 11 o'clock local time tonight, so that's around 9 GMT. Danes have been casting their votes all day to choose yes or no, whether they do want this closer relationship to Europe when it comes to defence and security policy. Now, for the last 30 years, Denmark has had an opt-out. So that's called the defence reservation. It's one of 4 different opt-outs that Denmark had as part of agreeing to the Maastricht Treaty 30 years ago. As you mentioned, it's the only EU member state to have that opt-out. So it is seen as quite a significant reversal of policy position should that yes vote go ahead.
And obviously we wait for that result. How's the public debate been there about this issue since the invasion?
Well, I mean, opinion polls have sort of largely seemed to suggest that people do support closer ties with Europe. As you mentioned, the opinion polls earlier, I mean, there's been quite a big shift back in March, there was this announcement of what they call the National Compromise, and that's when Danish Parliament across a number of parties agreed to this big boost in defence spending. And it was also at the same time they came up with a plan to get Denmark off Russian gas. That's seen as energy policy is also security policy now. And at the same time, they announced this referendum. Now, there has been a little bit of a confusion, I would say, in the public and some skepticism. For some time, there was a lot of debate about what the wording of the question on the referendum would even be. People were a little bit confused, perhaps, about what this really implies. What will be the implications if there is a yes vote? But the leadership have stressed that this is about signalling unity with Europe, and also it's a very changed security situation now for Europe since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and really is about that. But of course, there are also opposition. Some have worried that joining the EU or closer ties to the EU might undermine Denmark's NATO membership. Traditionally, Denmark has relied on NATO as the core of its defence policy, really. It's allied itself towards the US and the UK. It's taken part in NATO operations, for example, in Afghanistan and Iraq. But what this might happen is that should Denmark vote yes, then it's possible that Denmark may decide to get involved in other EU missions.
OK, Adrian, fascinating stuff. We'll wait for the result of that referendum. Thank you.